You're just a selfish old man who can't let go of the past. David's face was flushed with anger as he stood in my garage, pointing at my 1967 Ford Mustang. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor and illuminating the decades of memories contained within these four walls. This car has been sitting here collecting dust for years, and now when I actually need it, you're trying to ruin my life. I steadied myself against my workbench, the words hitting harder than any coal rock ever did during my 40 years in the West Virginia mines. The familiar ache in my lower back, a permanent reminder of a cave-in back in '83, seemed to intensify as I looked at my son. This was my flesh and blood, my only child, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for since the day the nurse placed him in my trembling arms. "David, this car isn't just transportation," I said quietly, running my calloused hand along the candy apple red finish I'd painstakingly applied myself 3 summers ago. "I've spent 30 years restoring it. Every paycheck that didn't go to your education or our bills went into these parts. Who cares?" He scoffed, running his hand through his expensive haircut, the kind they give at those fancy salons in Boston, where he now lived. So different from the simple cuts his mother used to give him on the back porch with kitchen scissors. "It's a stupid old car that you never even drive anymore. You're 72, Dad. Let's be realistic. You're too old to even get in and out of it comfortably." He gestured dismissively at my arthritic hands, twisted from years of gripping mining tools and wrenches. "You can barely hold a wrench these days." Jennifer, his fiancée, stood in the doorway, examining her manicure with practiced indifference. Her diamond engagement ring caught the light every time she moved her hand, a rock so large it made me wonder how David could afford it on even his banker's salary. She looked up only to check her watch, a gift from her wealthy parents in Connecticut who, according to David, owned some kind of manufacturing business that had been in their family for generations. "David, we're going to be late for the venue." "Appointment," she sighed, her voice dripping with impatience. "See, this is what I'm dealing with." David turned to me, his voice dripping with frustration. "Jennifer's parents are offering $20,000 for the wedding, but the venue we want in Cape Cod costs twice that. The Mustang could easily sell for $35,000, maybe more. You're literally standing between us and our dream wedding." I looked at the immaculate interior of the car. The leather seats I'd had custom made by an old upholsterer in Louisville who'd worked on classic cars his whole life. The restored dashboard with original gauges I'd tracked down from a collector. In Texas, the steering wheel I'd spent weeks refinishing by hand while recovering from my knee replacement surgery. Every inch of this vehicle contained a piece of my soul. 50,000, I corrected him quietly. "After the restoration work I've done, it's worth at least 50,000 to the right buyer." His eyes lit up at that, not with appreciation for my decades of craftsmanship, but with dollar signs. I could almost see him mentally calculating how many ice sculptures or champagne fountains that would buy for his wedding. "Even better. Come on, Dad. You always said you'd leave it to me anyway. I'm just asking for my inheritance a little early." "That's not the point, David. This car, no. The point is, you're an old man who cares more about a hunk of metal than your own son's happiness." He was shouting now, his face turning a deeper shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged in a way that reminded me painfully of his mother when she used to get worked up about something. Sarah had always been passionate, and David had inherited that fire from her. "You've been holding me back my whole life." First it was, "Sorry, David, can't make your baseball games because I'm working overtime." Then it was, "We can't afford that spring break trip to Cancun because I'm putting money into this stupid car." Now it's my wedding, the most important day of my life, and you're still prioritizing this thing. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. It was true, I'd missed some of his games. The mines didn't exactly offer flexible hours, and feeding my family had always come before watching Little League. But I'd been there for every moment I could. I still had the faded photograph of David's high school graduation tucked in my wallet, his grin wide beneath the cap and gown as I stood proudly beside him. I'd worked an extra year past my planned retirement to help pay for that Princeton education he'd been so determined to get. "We'll talk about this later," I said, turning back to the gentle task of polishing the chrome bumper. My arthritic fingers protested, but my heart needed the connection to the memories this car held, driving Sarah to the hospital when she went into labor with David, the Sunday drives we used to take through the Blue Ridge Mountains when he was small, teaching him to drive on his 16th birthday, arriving at his high school graduation with the top down and pride bursting in my chest. "There is no later, Dad. The deposit is due next week." David kicked an empty oil can, sending it clattering across the concrete floor and spilling the last few drops onto my meticulously clean garage floor. "You know what? Fine, keep your precious car. When you're dying alone in some nursing home, because you pushed away everyone who cared about you, at least you'll have the memory of this Mustang." Jennifer placed a manicured hand on his arm, her crimson nails matching the color of my car, in a coincidence that seemed almost mocking. "Come on, babe, we're late, and clearly your father doesn't care about what matters to you." Her eyes flicked dismissively around my modest garage, the space where I'd spent countless peaceful hours after returning from the darkness of the coal mines, finding solace in the simple act of creation and restoration. They stormed out. David, slamming the garage door so hard the dust particles danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. The calendar hanging on the wall, a freebie from Miller's Auto Parts showing classic cars by month, fluttered in the sudden gust. I didn't know then that it would be the last time I'd see my Mustang. I spent the rest of that evening sitting in the driver's seat of the car, not turning it on, just feeling the familiar embrace of the leather against my back. I remembered the day I'd bought it back in 1987. It had been a wreck then, rescued from a junkyard outside of Charleston. Sarah had thought I was crazy, spending $800 on what looked like a hopeless case. "Robert," she'd said, shaking her head with that half-smile that always melted my heart, "you're either the most optimistic man alive or the most foolish." Maybe I'd been both. Over the years, I'd slowly brought the Mustang back to life. First, the engine, rebuilding it piece by piece during long winter evenings when the snow made the mountain roads impassable. Then the transmission, the suspension, the electrical system. Each part represented overtime, shifts, careful budgeting, and hours of labor. By the time David was in high school, the car was running again, though the exterior still needed work. "When you graduate college," I'd promised him, "this car will be as beautiful on the outside as it is on the inside, and someday it'll be yours." I'd kept that promise. The year David graduated from Princeton, I'd finally saved enough to have the bodywork done professionally and applied the paint myself. The day he came home for Christmas, I'd presented him with a photo album documenting the restoration process from start to finish. "This is your heritage," I'd told him. "Not just the car, but what it represents. Patience, determination, the willingness to see value in something others might discard." He'd seemed to understand then. What had changed? When had the ambitious but kind-hearted boy who used to help me in this very garage transformed into this stranger who saw my life's work as nothing more than a quick source of cash? 3 days after David's visit, the first cough started. Just a tickle at first, nothing unusual for someone who'd spent his life breathing coal dust. But by the end of the week, I was struggling to catch my breath, my lungs feeling as though they were filled with concrete. My neighbor Frank found me collapsed on the front porch, trying to get to my truck to drive myself to the clinic. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of antiseptic smells, beeping machines, and the concerned faces of doctors. Pneumonia, they said, complicated by the black lung disease that most miners my age suffered from to some degree. Not immediately life-threatening with the right treatment, but serious enough to keep me hospitalized. Through my feverish haze, I asked the nurses to call David. They assured me they had, but days passed with no sign of him. Only Frank came to visit, bringing my mail and checking on my house. David called once, he told me gruffly, his own hands bearing the same work-worn marks as mine from 30 years at the same mine. Asked about your condition. Said he was tied up with wedding preparations but would try to come by. He never did. 2 weeks later, when the doctors finally discharged me with strict instructions to rest and a bag full of medications, it was Frank who drove me home in his rusted-out pickup truck. "You look like hell warmed over, Bobby," he said as he helped me up my front steps. "You need anything before I head out?" I shook my head, already feeling exhausted from the short walk from the car to the house. "Just need to lie down for a bit. Thanks for the ride, Frank." "No problem. Left some soup in your fridge. Call if you need anything else." Hesitated at the door. "You want me to check the garage? Make sure everything's locked up tight?" Something in his tone made me pause. Why? Has something happened? Frank wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just thinking with you being gone so long, might be good to check." A knot formed in my stomach as I followed Frank to the garage, moving slower than I would have liked. The door was slightly ajar, unusual since I always kept it firmly shut to protect my Mustang from the elements. With a sense of dread already forming, I pushed it open. The empty space hit me like a physical blow, where my Mustang should have been. Where it had been for over 30 years, there was nothing but oil stains on concrete. My toolboxes were still there, the special waxes and polishes I ordered from California, the vintage service manual I'd found at a swap meet in Ohio. Everything except the car itself. Frank put a hand on my shoulder. "I noticed it was gone last week when I came to get your mail. Figured maybe David had moved it somewhere safe while you were laid up." I couldn't speak. The absence of the car created a void that seemed to suck all the air from my lungs, worse than any mining accident I'd ever experienced. I was still standing there, staring at the emptiness, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. David's sleek BMW came to a stop, and he and Jennifer stepped out, both wearing new clothes that probably cost more than my monthly pension. The moment he saw me standing in the garage doorway, his expression shifted from surprise to a sort of rehearsed sympathy. "Dad, you're home!" he exclaimed, moving forward as if to embrace me, then stopping when he saw my face. "We were going to pick you up tomorrow. The hospital said, 'Where's my car?'" The words came out barely above a whisper, my voice still weak from the tubes they'd put down my throat during the worst of the pneumonia. Frank, sensing the tension, muttered something about needing to get back to his wife and slipped away, giving my arm a supportive squeeze as he passed. David and Jennifer exchanged a look before he cleared his throat. "That's what we came to talk to you about, Dad. I know you'll be upset at first, but we had this amazing opportunity." "Where is my car?" I repeated, louder this time, despite the pain it caused my raw throat. "I sold it," David said, his voice taking on that condescending tone he used when explaining why I should upgrade my flip phone or why I shouldn't wear my old work boots to his office Christmas party. "Dad, you have to understand, Jennifer's parents were only going to contribute so much to the wedding, and we found this perfect venue in Cape Cod, right on the water. The Mustang was just sitting here, and you always said it would be mine someday anyway." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. "It was going to waste just sitting in this garage, Mr. Mitchell, and the Ocean View Terrace only had one date available this summer. It was now or never. You sold my car without asking me?" My voice was surprisingly calm, even to my own ears. Inside, I felt like the mine shaft was collapsing around me again, like it did in '89 when we lost 3 good men. The same suffocating pressure, the same disorienting darkness. "Well, technically I didn't need to ask," David said, pulling out a folded paper from his pocket. Remember when you were sick with bronchitis last year? You signed a power of attorney so I could handle your bills. It covers property decisions too. I remembered signing something, but I'd been feverish, and David had assured me it was just so he could pay my electric bill while I recovered. I'd trusted him completely. That's what fathers do. How much? I asked, my fingers gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles turned white. Jennifer spoke up, her voice artificially sweet. We got $32,000 for it. The dealer said it needed work. I almost laughed. The car was in perfect condition. I'd replaced every part myself, meticulously documented every repair. It was worth at least $60,000 to any collector who knew what they were looking at. They'd been robbed, and they didn't even realize it. And the wedding, I asked, already knowing the answer. Oh, Dad, it was beautiful, Jennifer gushed, suddenly animated. She pulled out her phone, swiping through photos of an elaborate beachfront ceremony. We had a raw bar with 3 kinds of oysters, and the flowers were flown in from Ecuador, and the cake had 5 tiers with different flavors for each layer. Thanks to your car, we had the wedding of our dreams, David interrupted, putting his arm around her. You should be happy for us. We even saved some money to put a down payment on a condo in Boston. I looked at my son, this stranger wearing familiar features, and felt something inside me shift. All those years in the darkness of the mines, breathing in coal dust that would eventually shorten my life, working double shifts to ensure he'd never have to make the same sacrifices. All those missed baseball games and school plays because I was trying to give him a better future than I had. All that love poured into a vessel that had somehow leaked empty. I need to rest, I said simply, turning away from them. The doctor says I need to take it easy for a few weeks. Of course, Dad, David said, relief evident in his voice at my lack of explosion. We'll check on you tomorrow. I brought you some of that soup you like from the deli. I nodded without turning around and went inside, closing the door behind me. In my small living room, with its faded furniture and the photographs of a life spent in hard work, I sat down heavily in my recliner. Outside, I could hear them talking in low voices before the BMW started up and pulled away. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pen, making calculations and phone calls. First to Mike, my old friend from the mines who'd become a lawyer after an injury forced him out of underground work. Then to Bill at the bank, who'd helped me invest my modest savings over the years. Finally, to my cousin Alice in Florida, who'd been trying to get me to move to her retirement community since Sarah passed away 5 years ago. The next morning, despite still feeling weak from my hospital stay, I drove my old pickup truck to Mike's office in town. The effort left me winded, but I was determined. Mike looked concerned when he saw me, rising from behind his desk to help me to a chair. Bobby, you look like you should still be in the hospital. What's so urgent it couldn't wait until you're stronger? I told him everything, about the car, about David's betrayal, about the power of attorney that had been used against me. Mike's expression darkened as I spoke, his fingers drumming on the desk in the way they used to do when we'd play poker on Saturday nights with the other miners. That's a clear case of misrepresentation, he said when I finished. You signed that POA for a specific purpose, not to give him carte blanche with your property. We could challenge it in court, probably win. I shook my head. I don't want to sue my own son, Mike. That's not why I'm here. Then what do you want to do, Bobby? I pulled out the notepad where I'd made my calculations. I want to change my will, and I want to do something with what I have left that would really matter. 3 days later, the papers were drawn up. My small but valuable property, the 2-acre lot near Lake Michigan that David had always loved, the cabin in the Smoky Mountains, where we used to vacation, and my life insurance policy worth $150,000. All of it would now go to the West Virginia Coal Miners Foundation, which helped families of miners who had died or been injured on the job. I kept only my house and enough savings to live comfortably for whatever time I had left. As I signed the documents, I felt neither vindication nor regret, only a quiet certainty that I was doing the right thing. This wasn't about punishing David. It was about honoring the values I'd tried to instill in him, the values he seemed to have forgotten. "You sure about this, Bobby?" Mike asked as he witnessed my signature. "Once we file these papers, it's going to be hard to undo." "I'm sure," I said, setting down the pen. "The foundation does good work. I've seen how they helped Darrell Jenkins' family after he died in that collapse, how they put his kids through college." "That means something," Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. We'd both seen too many good men lost to the mines, too many families left struggling. "I'll take care of it. And Bobby, take care of yourself too, all right? You're looking better. Already, but don't push it. I promised I would rest, and I did try. But the emptiness of the garage kept drawing me back, a phantom pain like an amputated limb. I found myself standing there at odd hours, remembering the feel of the Mustang's steering wheel under my hands, the purr of its engine, the way the sunlight used to dance across its polished hood. In those moments, the loss felt so acute it was hard to breathe. Frank stopped by regularly, bringing casseroles his wife Ellen made, or just sitting with me on the porch, two old miners watching the sunset in companionable silence. He never mentioned the car, but sometimes I'd catch him glancing toward the garage with a sadness that mirrored my own. David called a few times, always brief conversations about nothing important. He never mentioned the Mustang, and I never brought it up. It hung between us, an unspoken barrier neither of us knew how to breach. Jennifer never came to the phone. Then, a month after I'd changed my will, David called with a different tone in his voice. "Dad, I've been thinking about the Mustang," he said, clearing his throat nervously. "I found the guy who bought it. He's willing to sell it back, but he wants $45,000. There was a pause, and I could practically hear the entitlement in his breathing. "I was wondering if you could help us out with that. Jennifer's parents are giving us a hard time about selling a family heirloom, and honestly, I miss the car, too." I let the silence stretch between us, just like the long silences I'd endured deep in the mines when the machinery would stop, and you could hear the mountain shifting above you. In those quiet moments underground, you learned to listen carefully, because sometimes silence told you more than noise ever could. "Dad, are you there?" David sounded impatient. "I'm here," I replied finally. "But I don't have that kind of money to give you, David." "What do you mean? You've got your savings, and there's that land by Lake Michigan. You could easily—" "I've made some changes," I interrupted gently. "The lake property, the cabin, my investments, they're not mine anymore." There was a long pause. "What are you talking about? What did you do with them?" "I donated them to the West Virginia Coal Miners Foundation. The paperwork was finalized last week." "You what?" His voice rose sharply, echoing through the phone so loudly I had to hold it away from my ear. "Dad, that's my inheritance. Our inheritance. How could you do that without talking to me first?" The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. I almost smiled, though there was no joy in it. "I thought about what you said, son, about how I'm just an old man who doesn't need things anymore, about how I should let go of the past." That was different. "I was talking about a car, not everything you own." I could hear panic creeping into his voice now, the realization of what he'd lost hitting him. "You can undo this, right? Call Mike and tell him it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, David. Just like selling my Mustang wasn't a mistake to you. We both made choices about what we valued." "This is insane!" he shouted. "You're punishing me for the car. That's what this is about." "No, son, this isn't punishment. It's clarity. I ran my hand over the worn arm of my recliner, the same chair I'd sat in to read him bedtime stories when he was little. The foundation helps families of miners who died or were injured, people who worked alongside me for decades, people who understood the value of sacrifice. So that's it? After everything I've done for you? His voice cracked, but not with emotion, with disbelief. Everything you've done for me, I repeated softly. Yes, let's talk about that. When your mother was dying and needed round-the-clock care, who took time off work to be with her? When this house needed a new roof last year, who climbed up there with me to save on labor costs? When I had bronchitis, who brought me soup or checked if I needed groceries? The silence on the other end was deafening. The car wasn't just a car, David. It was every sacrifice I ever made, every double shift, every missed baseball game, every time I came home too tired to do anything but fall into bed, my lungs burning, and my back aching, all so you could have opportunities I never had. Dad, I'm not finished, I said firmly. You know what that car represented to me? Freedom. The promise that one day, when the mines had taken everything they could from my body, I'd still have something beautiful that I had created with my own hands. Something to remind me that all those years in darkness were worth it because they gave you light. I heard muffled voices on his end, Jennifer saying something urgent in the background. I need to go, David said abruptly. We'll talk about this later. Goodbye, son, I replied, knowing it might be a long time before I heard from him again. The line went dead, and I sat there with the phone in my hand for a long time, remembering David as a little boy, his eyes wide with wonder, as I showed him how to change a spark plug for the first time. Where had that boy gone? When had money and status become more important to him than the values I'd tried so hard to teach? The next few weeks passed slowly. I gradually regained my strength, though the doctors warned that my lungs would never fully recover. Black lung was a miner's constant companion in retirement, the price we paid for the coal that kept America's lights on. I started volunteering at the local Veterans Center 3 days a week, serving coffee and playing checkers with men who understood what it meant to sacrifice for something larger than themselves. Frank and Ellen invited me over for dinner every Sunday, a kindness I appreciated more than they knew. Ellen was a wonderful cook, and their small house was always warm and welcoming. Their son James, who worked as a paramedic in Charleston, sometimes joined us with his wife and 2 young children. Watching those kids play in the backyard, I felt both joy and an ache of loss for the grandchildren I might never have. I received a letter from the Coal Miners Foundation, thanking me for my generous donation and inviting me to their annual fundraising dinner in September. They mentioned plans to use part of my contribution to fund a new respiratory treatment center for miners with black lung disease. The idea that my gift might help others breathe a little easier brought me more comfort than I'd expected. David didn't call again. I saw on social media, which Frank's daughter helped me navigate occasionally, that he and Jennifer had gone to the Bahamas for a delayed honeymoon. The photos showed them smiling on white sand beaches, holding colorful drinks, seemingly without a care in the world. I wondered if he ever thought about the cost of that happiness. Then, 2 months after our last conversation, something unexpected happened. I was working in my vegetable garden on a hot July afternoon, the sun beating down on my back as I staked the tomato plants that were growing faster than I could keep up with. The sound of a car engine made me look up, expecting to see Frank's truck pulling into the driveway for our planned fishing trip. Instead, I heard the distinctive rumble of a V8 engine I would have recognized anywhere. I stood up slowly from where I'd been kneeling in the dirt, my knees protesting the movement, and turned toward the sound. There, gleaming in the sunlight, was my 1967 Mustang. The candy apple red paint job shone like it had just rolled off the assembly line. Behind the wheel was David, looking different somehow, his designer clothes replaced by a simple t-shirt, his carefully styled hair slightly disheveled. He got out slowly, not meeting my eyes at first. "I found him," he said, gesturing to the car. "The collector who bought it. Took me weeks of calling every dealer in 5 states. I stood there, dirt still on my gardening gloves, unable to form words. The Mustang looked exactly as I remembered it, the chrome gleaming, the interior immaculate, even the small American flag decal in the corner of the rear window that I'd placed there in memory of my father who'd fought in Korea. He wouldn't sell it back at first," David continued, running his hand along the hood in a gesture so reminiscent of my own that it made my chest tighten. "Said he knew what he had, but I kept calling. Told him the whole story, about the mines, about you, restoring it over 30 years, about what an idiot I'd been. He finally looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in his eyes for a very long time: humility. I sold the condo," he said simply. "And the BMW, Jennifer. She didn't understand. We're not together anymore. I took off my gardening gloves and moved closer to the car, afraid to believe it was really there. I reached out tentatively and touched the driver's side door, feeling the smooth, cool metal beneath my fingertips. It was real. "I'm sorry, Dad." David's voice cracked, but this time it was with genuine emotion. "I didn't understand what this car meant, what any of it meant. The foundation called me last week. They're using your donation to fund a new respiratory treatment center for miners with black lung. They wanted to name it after you." I placed my hand on the warm metal of the Mustang's hood, feeling the familiar curves under my palm. For the first time since Sarah died, I felt tears threatening to spill from my eyes. Not from sadness, but from something else entirely. A complex mixture of pride, hope, and cautious joy. I was so busy trying to impress Jennifer's family, trying to be someone I thought mattered, that I forgot who I actually came from. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys, offering them to me. It can't undo what I did with the power of attorney. I can't change the fact that I betrayed your trust, but I can give this back to you. It's yours. It always was." I took the keys, their weight familiar in my hand, the leather keychain Sarah had given me for our 30th anniversary still attached. "You paid $45,000. He shook his head. $60,000, and it was worth every penny." "Where did you get that kind of money? You said you sold the condo, and the BMW, and my Rolex, and cashed in my stock options." He looked down at his hands, which I noticed for the first time were slightly roughened, as if he'd been doing physical work. "Turns out bankers don't make as much as everyone thinks when they're just starting out. Most of what I had was debt." "Where will you live now, without the condo?" David looked around at my modest house, the well-tended garden, the quiet street where neighbors still brought each other casseroles during hard times. "I was hoping maybe I could stay here for a while, just until I figure things out. I could help with the garden, maybe learn how to change the oil in the Mustang properly this time." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw beyond. The stranger he'd become to the boy he'd once been. The boy who had watched me with wide eyes as I explained how an engine worked. The boy who had once valued the same things I did. "The garage has a cot," I said, the corner of my mouth lifting slightly. "And I could use help with the tomatoes. They're coming in faster than I can pick them." He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thanks, Dad." I dangled the Mustang's keys between us. "Want to go for a drive? There's a road up through the mountains where you can really hear this engine sing." As we pulled out of the driveway, the Mustang's engine rumbling beneath us, I rolled down the window and felt the summer air rush against my face. Beside me, David was quiet, respectful in a way he hadn't been in years. We had a long road ahead, of us, not just the mountain pass we were heading toward, but the path to rebuilding what had been broken between us. The first few days of David's stay were awkward. We moved around each other cautiously, like dancers learning unfamiliar steps. He slept on the cot in the garage as promised, despite my offer to clear out Sarah's old sewing room. "I want to be near the car," he'd said, and I understood. The Mustang was a bridge between us, a physical manifestation of the connection we were trying to rebuild. Each morning, I'd find him already awake, usually tinkering with something in the garage or weeding the garden before the heat of the day set. In his hands, once soft from office work, quickly developed calluses. He didn't complain about the manual labor or the lack of luxury. Instead, he seemed to find a kind of peace in it, much as I had after leaving the mines. One evening, about a week after his return, we sat on the porch watching the fireflies appear as dusk settled over the mountains. David nursed a beer, and I sipped the one whiskey I allowed myself each day. "I found your ledgers," he said suddenly, "in the garage, the ones where you kept track of every penny you spent on the Mustang." I nodded. I'd kept meticulous records of the restoration, partly for insurance purposes, partly because it was my nature to be thorough. "I did the math," he continued, his voice soft. "Over 30 years you spent more than $80,000 on parts and tools. That's not counting your labor." "It was worth it," I said simply. "But that's more than you made in some years, according to the tax returns I used to help you file. How did you afford it?" I looked out at the darkening yard, remembering. "I worked overtime whenever I could, took on side jobs repairing farm equipment for neighbors, skipped lunches, patched my work clothes instead of buying new ones." I shrugged. "You do what you have to do for the things that matter." David was quiet for a long moment. "I never knew," he finally said. "All those years growing up, I thought we were just regular, middle class. I never realized how tight things really were. That was the point," I told him. "Your mother and I didn't want you to feel the kind of lack we grew up with. We wanted you to believe you could have anything if you worked hard enough for it." "Maybe that was the problem," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "Maybe I never learned the value of things because I never saw the real cost." We sat in silence for a while after that, watching the stars appear one by one above the mountains. The next morning I found David in the garage, the Mustang's maintenance manual open beside him as he carefully changed the oil. "Thought I'd get this done before it gets too hot," he said when he saw me. "The manual says it should be changed every 3,000 miles, but since it doesn't get driven much, we should still do it twice a year because of moisture buildup." I hid my smile. I told him the same thing dozens of times when he was younger, but it seemed to mean more coming from the manual. "Good thinking," I said. "There's some breakfast inside when you're done." Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. David took on more and more responsibility around the house, fixing the leaking bathroom faucet, painting the weathered fence, reorganizing the tool shed. In the evenings, we'd often take the Mustang for drives through the countryside, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying the rumble of the engine and the scenic views. During one of those drives, David asked about the Coal Miners Foundation. "How did you find out about them? Was it because of what happened to Mr. Jenkins?" Darrell Jenkins had been one of my closest friends in the mines. He died in a collapse when David was just a boy, leaving behind a wife and 3 young children. "Partly," I admitted, "but I've known about their work for years. They helped the Farrell family after John lost his leg in that equipment accident. Paid for Mrs. Reynolds' oxygen when the company insurance ran out. They do good work. The woman I spoke to, Margaret, I think her name was. She said they're planning to break ground on the treatment center next spring," David said. "They want you to be there for the ceremony. Said they couldn't have done it without your donation." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The idea that something good would come from all this, that miners like me might breathe a little easier because of my contribution, it gave meaning to the loss I'd felt. She also mentioned they're looking for someone to help with their outreach program, David continued, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. Someone who knows the mining community, who could visit families and help identify those most in need of assistance. He hesitated. I may have given her my number. I glanced at him, surprised. You? He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. I thought maybe I could help. I've got that finance background. Could be useful with their budgeting. Or fundraising. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Besides, it's time I gave something back to this community. It gave me everything I have, in a way. Something shifted in my chest at his words. A loosening of a tightness I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. My son was finding his way back, to the values that mattered, not through my lectures or resentment, but through his own path. The next day, Margaret from the foundation called. She spoke to David first, then asked to talk to me. Mr. Mitchell, we're so grateful for your contribution, she said warmly. And now your son tells me he might be interested in helping us with our financial planning and outreach efforts. It would be wonderful to have both Mitchells involved. He's got a good head for numbers, I told her, watching through the window as David methodically weeded the vegetable garden. And he's learning about what really matters. After the call, I joined David outside. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, but he'd been working for hours without complaint, his t-shirt soaked with sweat. The foundation called, I said, handing him a glass of iced tea. Sounds like they're interested in your help. He accepted the drink gratefully, taking a long swallow before responding. It's just volunteer work for now, but Margaret mentioned they might have a permanent position opening up in the fall. Lower salary than I'm used to, but... He looked around at the mountains surrounding us, the rolling green hills so different from Boston's concrete landscape. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. That evening, we took the Mustang to Frank and Ellen's for dinner. David had met them briefly before, but this was the first time he'd really spent time with my closest friends. Frank eyed him warily at first, protective of me after everything that had happened. But by the end of the night, they were laughing together over Frank's stories of our mining days. Your dad saved my life once, you know, Frank told David, as Ellen served her famous apple pie. Cave-in back in '86, support beam came down, pinned me. Your dad lifted that beam enough for 2 other men to pull me out, even though the whole tunnel was coming down around us. David looked at me with new eyes. You never told me that story. I shrugged. Embarrassed by the attention. Wasn't much to tell. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't have, Frank said firmly. Most men would have run. Bobby stayed. That's the kind of man your father is. On the drive home, David was unusually quiet. As we pulled into the driveway, he finally spoke. I never really knew you, did I? All these years, and I never really understood what your life was like. You were a child, I said gently. Children aren't supposed to carry their parents' burdens, but I should have tried to understand when I got older. Instead, He trailed off, staring at his hands on the steering wheel. I was ashamed, Dad, of where I came from, of your work clothes and calloused hands, of this small town. I wanted to be someone else, someone important. The honesty of his confession hit me harder than any accusation could have. You were always someone important, I told him, to your mother, to me. He nodded, blinking rapidly. I know that now. The next morning, a sleek sedan with Connecticut license plates pulled into my driveway. Jennifer stepped out, looking as polished and out of place as a diamond in a coal seam. She eyed the modest house with poorly concealed disdain before marching up to the door and ringing the bell. David answered. I stood a few paces behind him, curious about this unexpected visitor. What are you doing here, Jennifer? David asked, making no move to invite her in. "What am I doing here? What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "You haven't answered my calls in weeks. You sold our condo, our car, everything, without even discussing it with me. And for what? To live in this place?" She gestured dismissively at the house and yard. "This place is my home," David said quietly. "And yes, I sold those things because they were bought with money that wasn't rightfully ours." Jennifer's perfectly made-up face contorted with anger. "Not rightfully ours? It was a car, David. An old useless car that your father never even drove." "It wasn't just a car," he replied, his voice steady. "It was his life's work, something I should have respected." "Oh, please. You sound just like him now." She peered around David to glare at me. "What did you do to him? Guilt him into giving up everything we worked for?" "I didn't do anything," I said, stepping forward to stand beside my son. "David made his own choices. Well, he's making the wrong ones. We had a plan, David. Boston, your career at the bank, my interior design business. We were going to be somebody." David's expression softened slightly. "I am somebody, Jennifer. I'm Robert Mitchell's son. And that's something to be proud of, not ashamed of." She stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head in disgust. "I don't even know who you are anymore. My parents were right about you all along." "What's that supposed to mean?" David asked. "They said you were putting on airs, trying to be something you're not. That sooner or later you'd go back to this." She waved her hand dismissively at our surroundings. "I should have listened." "Maybe you should have," David agreed. "We both might have been happier." Jennifer's face flushed with anger. "Fine, waste your life in this backwater if that's what you want. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away." She turned on her heel and stalked back to her car. David watched her drive away, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said finally. "Are you okay?" I asked. He considered the question carefully before answering. "You know what? I think I am. For the first time in a long time, I actually am." That night, we sat in the garage, the Mustang gleaming under the overhead lights. David ran his hand over the dashboard, his touch gentle, appreciative. "I think I understand now," he said quietly, "why this car means so much to you. It's not just the restoration work or the money you put into it. It's what it represents." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "It's about transformation," he said slowly. "Taking something broken and making it whole again. Seeing value where others saw only junk." He looked up at me. "It's about patience and faith and the belief that anything worth having is worth working for." "Yes," I said simply, my throat tight with emotion. "I want to learn that lesson," he said. "Not just about the car, but about life, about relationships." He hesitated. "About being your son." I reached across the seat and placed my hand on his shoulder. "You never stopped being my son, David. Even when I was angriest, even when I changed my will, you were always my son." He nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Can we fix this, Dad? What I broke between us?" "We already are," I told him, and in that moment I knew it was true. The summer faded into fall, the mountains erupting in a blaze of red and gold as the leaves changed. David started working part-time for the Coal Miners Foundation, using his financial expertise to help them manage their growing resources. The rest of his time he spent with me, learning the skills I'd tried to teach him years ago. How to repair a leaky roof, how to grow vegetables that would see us through the winter, how to maintain the Mustang so it would run smoothly for years to come. Margaret called one crisp October afternoon with news. "The board has approved the plans for the Robert Mitchell Respiratory Center," she announced. "Construction will begin next spring. And they've also created a full-time position for David, if he's interested. Director of Community Outreach." David accepted the job. It paid less than half what he'd made in Boston, but as he told me later, some things are worth more than money. He moved out of the garage and into a small apartment in town, though he still came over almost every day. Sometimes we'd work on projects around the house or take the Mustang for long drives through the mountains. Other times we'd just sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing as the sun set behind the hills. One evening in late November, as the first snow flurries danced in the air, David brought up something I hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about the will, Dad," he said hesitantly. I tensed slightly, wondering if the progress we'd made was about to unravel. "What about it?" "I think you should keep it the way it is," he said, surprising me. "The foundation does important work. They should get the cabin and the lake property and whatever else you've set aside for them." "Are you sure?" I asked. "That's your inheritance we're talking about." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I've already received my inheritance, Dad. Not the material things, but the values you tried to teach me. The understanding of what really matters." He looked toward the garage, where the Mustang was safely stored for the winter. "Besides, I have the car. When the time comes, and I hope that's many years from now, that will be enough." I nodded, too moved to speak. After a moment, I managed to say, "I'm proud of you, son." "I'm proud to be your son," he replied simply. That Christmas, David organized a fundraising drive for the foundation, raising enough money to provide holiday meals and gifts for 30 families of injured miners. The local newspaper ran a story about it, featuring a photo of David and me standing beside the Mustang, which we'd decorated with a wreath for the occasion. In the spring, as promised, the foundation broke ground on the new respiratory center. They asked me to turn the first shovel of dirt, an honor that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. David stood beside me, his hand supportive on my arm, as my aging body protested the effort. "Your mother would be proud," I told him afterward. "Of both of us." "I think she is," he said, looking up at the clear blue sky. "Wherever she is, I think. She's watching and smiling." The year that followed brought changes I never could have anticipated. David thrived in his role at the foundation, his financial background and genuine compassion making him particularly effective at securing resources for families in need. He started dating Margaret's daughter, Amy, a kind-hearted teacher at the local elementary school who seemed to appreciate him for who he was, not what he owned or earned. My health had its ups and downs, the black lung making some days harder than others. But with David nearby, I never lacked for help or company on the bad days. And on the good days, we'd take the Mustang out, sometimes joining classic car rallies where my meticulously restored vehicle always drew admiring crowds. At one such rally in the neighboring county, a collector approached us, eyeing the Mustang with obvious desire. "Beautiful car," he said, running an appreciative hand along the fender. 1967 289 V8. 302, I corrected. Rebuilt it myself. "Impressive." He glanced between David and me. "Don't suppose you'd consider selling? I could offer you 75,000. Cash." Before I could respond, David spoke up. "Sorry, it's not for sale. Not at any price." The man looked disappointed but nodded in understanding. "Can't blame a guy for trying. If you ever change your mind." He handed David a business card before moving on to the next vehicle. As we drove home that evening, the sun setting behind us and casting long shadows across the road, David brought up the collector's offer. 75,000 is a lot of money, he said. "You could do a lot with that." "So could you," I pointed out. "That car is going to be yours someday." He shook his head. "I'm not thinking about me. I'm thinking about you. The treatments for black lung are expensive, and with inflation—" "I'm fine," I assured him. "The foundation's new center will help with the medical costs, and I've got enough saved to see me through." "Still," he persisted, 75,000 would make things a lot more comfortable for you." I glanced at him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. "What happened to not for sale at any price?" "That's how I feel," he admitted. "But I wanted to make sure it's how you feel too. It's your car, after all." I thought about it as we crested a hill. The valley below us spread out like a patchwork quilt in the golden evening light. The Mustang's engine hummed steadily, the vehicle responding to my touch as faithfully as it had for decades. "Do you remember what I told you about this car when you were a boy?" I asked. "About why I bought it in the first place?" David nodded. "You said it was a promise to yourself, that one day you'd have something beautiful that was yours alone, something no one could take from you." "That's right," I said, "and now I know I was wrong about that last part, because the most beautiful things in life, they're not things at all. They're relationships, connections, the bonds between people who love each other." I smiled at my son. "No one can take those from you either, not really, not if you don't let them." We drove in companionable silence for a while, the purr of the engine the only sound. "So that's a no on selling?" David finally asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "That's a definite no," I confirmed. "Some things are worth more than money." "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I think that's the most valuable lesson you ever taught me, even if it took me way too long to learn it." As we turned into my driveway, the last rays of sunlight catching the Mustang's polished chrome, I felt a profound sense of peace. The car that had once come between us had ultimately brought us back together, stronger than before. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world. "How about we take her out again tomorrow?" I suggested as we parked in the garage. "There's a nice drive through the Blue Ridge I've been wanting to show you." "I'd like that," David said, his smile matching my own. "I'd like that very much." And so we did, day after day, season after season, father and son together on the open road, the Mustang carrying us forward into whatever the future might hold.